Alright, hello yet again, guys. So, today I wanted to talk about, as it says on the top, understanding intervals and note naming conventions. What do we mean by this? Intervals are pretty easy to understand. They're literally just the spaces between notes. This will help you out with chord construction as well as scales. Then there is also the note naming conventions part of it. This could be referred to as the alphabet rule. I wanted to make this video to prepare us for going into another video about the diatonic modes, but I did feel that this basic lesson is necessary. This would also be a great first video to watch before you watch the modes of the pentatonic scale video as well. So before we even worry about those letter names there, I wanted to look at just our distinctions here. We got root, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and root again. This pattern should look familiar if you've memorized your major scales. As we can see here, we have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's our major scale construction. If I put those letter names back up there, we've got the key of C here. Obviously, between each letter name, there would be an enharmonic. This could be D sharp, E flat, the black keys essentially between these natural keys. But now having looked at that, let's go backwards a little bit. We'll actually take it all the way back here, and we'll realize that while these are our scale degrees, there also are intervals. There are major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh. There's our other names for these. I'll actually in just a second be writing down all the gazillions of names that could confuse you because intervals can have a ton of different names. So we have to think about if there's something between the root and the second, what could we possibly name this? Well, we could name it sharp root, but that would be weird because the root is just the root. You never want to have a sharp 1 or a sharp root. So instead we go with flat 2. Now following that same idea over here, we could do a sharp 2, and that is true in some instances. We'll get to that. But for now we're going to keep with the general name flat 3. And we go on to 4. Now 4 and 5 are a little more split evenly, meaning that when I put this up, I think of this as sharp 4 and flat 5. They honestly both can get used pretty evenly. Sharp 4 is distinctive of the Lydian mode or of the fourth chord in a major scale. And then flat 5 is distinctive of the seventh chord of a major scale, a diminished chord. Then going on and sticking with our same pattern, we would have flat 6, and then the next would be flat 7. So we've got them all written in here now. Now, if I put any note name here, you should be able to spell out the entire musical alphabet all the way back to that note again, and you should know which interval place each note is. So for C, pretty easy to see that F sharp, say, in relation to C would be the sharp 4. Let's move it to one that has a little more accidentals. Let's move it to E. So now we've got F is actually our flat second. So in order to play our major scale again on E, right, we have to go to the major second spot here, which would now be F sharp. We'll practice filling these in when we get to the note naming conventions. Okay, so for now, I want to do some other possible names of these intervals because, as I said before, that can get quite confusing. So let's first say root can equal 1, and equal tonic could be another name for it, okay? Let's just try to include as many as we possibly can. On our next line, we had flat 2, which can also be called the minor second interval. I'll come back through here in just a second and add some more, but let's do the more common ones first. 2, you also might see it written as major second. Flat 3, you might see as minor third. 4 will sometimes be written with a P for perfect fourth. It just means that it doesn't have a flat or a sharp really. It is a perfect interval. We go on to the next one. We had sharp 4, or as we said, we could call it flat 5. And one more for this one, you could call this a tritone. I guess I'll spell it out entirely, but you might see it just written TT on some things, tritone. This is the perfect halfway point. We've gone 6 notes, we gotta go 6 more to get back to the start again. This is also sometimes called the devil's interval because it sounds quite dissonant with the root. Then we go into 5, or what some might call a perfect fifth. Again, we could see it written that way. We have flat 6. Sometimes you'll see it written as minor 6. You just need to know with all of these that they're interchangeable. You're not going to just see one or the other. I know music just has so many names for the same idea. 6 major 6, flat 7, you're starting to get the hang of it, I imagine, goes to minor 7, and 7 goes to major 7. Okay, now that we're back to the start again, let's start going into extensions. Okay, so what can happen after this sometimes is that you'll see that they go all the way up to 7. Well, instead of going back to root, what if we called the root 8? Because that signifies that it is the same note as our root, but it is being played an octave higher. That's actually where we get oct from octave, is from the number 8. So we're now an octave up, and then if we kept going, our next number, 2, would now be called 9. So for flat 2, you could also see it called sometimes flat 9. Okay, these are called extensions. Usually you won't see a 9, an 11, or a 13 unless a 7th is included in the chord. That's not always true because people write chords differently from one another, but it is important to know that usually you will have a 7th, and that's why they're using the 9th, 11th, or 13th. Because you're like, why wouldn't they just say second and keep it simple? And it's because that 9 is actually signifying that it's a 7th chord. So our next one, 2, could also be called 9. Oh my goodness, I'm realizing that we just did this whole thing without even adding our third in. We skipped up our major third, one of the more important ones. As you can see, I can make mistakes too. There we go, now we have our third major. Then we keep going, we got the 4th here, and that is the 11th. Sometimes we'll see the sharp 4 called the sharp 11. Sometimes the flat 6 can be called flat 13, and sometimes the major 6 can be called just 13. So we notice we skipped up 1, 3, 5, and 7. Occasionally someone might call a high third a 10th. But usually we don't see these used because 1, 3, 5, and 7 are part of the main chord that we're thinking of, so we typically don't have extension names for those. So let me try to move this off to the side of the screen here a little bit. Okay, so next what I want to do is I'm actually going to take away some things I have covering our ruler here. And this will expose that this is not just an idea of one root up to another root. It is a continuum that keeps going through lower octaves and through higher octaves. So if I take those away, here we've got our root, but we could go backwards just as well as we can go forwards. And then once we go forwards, we can continue going higher and higher. These are always the same interval, just in a different octave now. Now let's put our letters up here. I want to bring C back to being my root again. Now, if we were to name these in C, this is where we're starting to get into note naming conventions and the alphabet rule. So because we're thinking of flat 2 right here, we want this to be representative. D is our 2 when we're thinking in C, so we want this one to be a D flat. Now when we're thinking, again, still in C, when we're thinking of 3, 3 has to be represented in terms of E. This is the alphabet thing we're talking about. There needs to be one letter of the alphabet represented for each number. So we would have E flat. Then now in this spot you have to remember we could be thinking of this as a sharp 4 or a flat 5, and we're going to call it a different name depending on which interval we mean when we're saying it. So if that C is part of a diminished chord, we're going to be thinking of this as a flat 5 and calling it G flat. But if the same note is part of, say, a major 7 sharp 11 chord, we're going to be conceiving of this F sharp as a sharp 4, or as we said down here, a sharp 11, which is another name for it. Now the others that follow become more obvious. Obviously A flat, and our next one would be B flat. I'll go ahead and erase these. Now showing it on a piano in C, right, if C is 1, we would have 2 is D, 3 is E, 4 is F, 5 is G, 6 is A, and 7 is B. So we see that all the white keys make us the key of C. But the only reason this happens is just because they conveniently happen to skip the black notes at the right time. If we move into another key, let's undo this. If we move, let's say, into the key of E now, and now E has become our 1, then we have to keep following up here. We got F sharp is actually our 2. So we're going to put that up there. Okay. And we keep going. Now we have G sharp as our 3. Remember, why am I calling them F sharp and G sharp? Is because 2 has to be some kind of F when we're thinking in E. Or G has to be some kind of 3 when we're thinking in E. So it's going to be G sharp, not A flat in this case. So let's put that in there. This is how we figure out our keys on a piano, which is quite a bit harder than on the guitar. On the guitar, the keys all look the same. It's movable patterns. Okay, so let's move on to our next one. Then if we're going to the 4th degree now, that's just back on A. Easy to find there. Good. If we're going to the 5th degree, we got B. We're still on a white key there. Now moving on to the 6th degree of the E major scale, we have an opening. We have to start thinking again. It has to be in terms of C because C is the 6th of E. So we got ourselves a C sharp here. The 6 is a C sharp. And then moving to the 7, again, same thing. We got a D sharp here. So 7. And then we're back to 1 down there. So this is how you would play E major on a keyboard. So this is where the sharps and flats idea on a circle of fifths comes from. If you're moving on the right side of the circle, you're dealing with sharp keys like E. And if you're moving on the left side of the circle, you're dealing with flat keys, which actually C also tends to use flats as well, as we saw. C is all natural. In its scale degrees, it is all natural, but when actually writing out the additional 5 notes, they tend to be flat. But let's move to a flat key just so we have another example. I'm going to move over really quick to E flat. Okay, and so now we've moved it to the new key center. We're thinking E flat right here. I'll just put an E flat in here real quick so that way we don't get too confused. But so now we'd have to rethink what we're calling E. It would have to be completely erased. And the reason is because if some kind of E, like E flat, is our root, then obviously some kind of F has to be our 2nd degree. And so we would have to rename this to be F flat, which, as anyone knows, F flat is just E, but you have to use that name for it when we're talking about the key of E flat. This is the alphabet rule. So let's do these together. We'd have G as our 3rd note, so we can have a G flat. That's great. And then we go on to 4. Now 4 needs to be in terms of A, so we would have A flat here as our 4th. A would actually be the sharp 4. Okay, it's getting strange. B flat would be our 5. So what would be a flat 5? It would actually be a B double flat. Okay, so there you can actually see now why, if B has to be one of our 5s, then B double flat, which is the same thing as A, is going to be thought of as our flat 5. Now you may be saying, oh, well, what's this B still doing here? Well, we're going to have to fix that one too. Okay, so that's going to become C flat because we're thinking about a 6 in the key of E flat. Okay, and then now you can see it's been filled out here. I put C flat in place of B. We have a D flat and a D for our 7, and then we're back to E flat again. So as you're maybe starting to see, whatever our root is, it's going to have its own alphabet letter. Whatever's in the 2 spot, those have to match regardless of whether you like that name or not. Like, I wouldn't like F flat, but I have to use it. Whatever's in the 3 spots has to match. Whatever's in the 4, being used as the 4, has to match. And it always goes sequentially by the next letter. 5s, 6s, 7s, and back to root again. So this is how you go about actually naming different major scales, and this is why C flat or F flat end up getting used, or things like B double flat, G double sharp. Now just for a little bit of further practice, let's spell it out on the piano. If we've got 1 here as E flat, we now have F as our 2. Great, we can always just do whole. I mean, we could figure it out this way. Half, and as long as I stick to my correct old whole half pattern, pull that guy back up here. As long as I stick to this pattern up top, I mean, I won't ever be wrong. Another one, let's do 5. So another whole step, right? Another whole step to 6. Another whole step to 7. And then another half step and you're back to 1 again. So you can always just follow whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Or you can use your mind to think a little more about what to call all of these. So now let's get rid of the piano. And just as a very last thing, you can see how applying these to, if someone says, oh, my scale is, let's say, this is actually just the natural minor scale, or Aeolian, as it's sometimes called. And so then you could just literally pick out, you've got your root and your 1, same thing, and then you got 2 and flat 3, and 4, so you can just go about figuring out what exactly each one of those equals. You should always try to write scales like this rather than saying, what is the scale E flat, F, G flat, you know what I mean? It's not very helpful, and honestly, you'll probably end up writing some of the wrong flats or sharps because of doing that, because you're not thinking in terms of these intervals. It's a much more universal question to just ask, what is this scale? Because then it doesn't matter which note I start on, I can figure out how to start it on any note. Another example you might see might be something like this. This is a half diminished chord construction. 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. So if we construct this in E flat, we know we got E flat, obviously. We can look up here and say we got G flat for our flat 3. Look up again, we got B double flat for our flat 5, and then we got D flat for our flat 7. This would be the actual correct spelling of a E flat half diminished chord. Normally it would be this circle with a line through it. There we go. I just put the line in there myself now. So that would be E flat half diminished there. But now let's say someone gives you another chord and they say it's 1, 3, sharp 11, 7. So now you've got the way to sort of name these out. So you would have your E flat, you'd have your 3rd, G. Let's go to the 7th first. So D, I'm just putting them in order of highness here. And then the sharp 11, which would be A. And this would give you what is an E flat major 7, yes, with a sharp 11. This would be could be a very beautiful 4 chord. And on that additional note, I should add that E flat half diminished would be a normal 7 chord actually. So you got 2 really cool voicings that you can use just staying completely in a major scale. Okay, so hopefully that clears up some bits of how intervals work, how the alphabet rule and naming works, why some keys are flat and some keys are sharp, why some people say things like B isn't the same as C flat. All right, see you soon.